Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today I want to talk about the plausibility of an actual Mad Max scenario occurring in light of recent events. Let's get to it. So these types of red videos are going to be chock full of digressions and prognostications about what I think, my opinion, and that's all this is, on what is happening and what may happen in the future. So take it all with a grain of salt. Now, before we talk about the Civil War stuff, the second wave stuff, the economic stuff, all of that, let's talk about the resilience of the system for a minute. Right now, we are fully leveraged, I would say, in every aspect. You know, there's not that the Fed can say that it's going to keep printing money to keep, all of the corporations liquid. I hate using that word, but, to keep everybody liquid enough that they can keep, making the moves that they have to make to stay in business for the short term. But there's going to be a big wave of bankruptcies coming in the not so distant future as a result of all this borrowing and lending to these corporations, which are essentially not profitable. So the world has been able to hold it together, relatively speaking, at least, what we see on the news, because, it's really hard to know what's going on the ground nowadays in a variety of different places unless you're actually on the ground, because the media spins things, the alternative media spins things. You really have to be there to know what's really going on. Like, nobody really knows what's going on in Brazil or India right now, where they have so many cases. They have more cases than they can count. I'm sure the death toll is far higher than we know. Really, this was a 1% SHDF scenario, and look at the consequence. The economy was nearly cut in half. Well, not the economy, the stock market was cut in half because, of course, now people are just taking that distinction for granted now that the stock market is different than the real economy. But these two things are tethered with an elastic, and eventually they have to cross paths again. One may go out in one direction and another in another direction, but eventually they have to interlace at some point. And it's crazy how bad the poorest in the world are going to get screwed as a result of all this quantitative easing, because they're the ones who are going to have to pay for it all. If these corporations aren't able to pay back these debts, or if they find ways, to fudge the numbers or whatever so they don't have to pay back the debts, or whatever the case might be, who's going to be stuck with the bill. It's going to be the taxpayer. So they're going to take all this money and they're going to pay out all their CEOs their regular wages for a lot of these companies which aren't making any money, and then they're all going to file for bankruptcy, and guess who's going to get stuck with the bill? Well, it's going to be future generations. And because all of the legal loopholes and whatnots, and look, I'm not really one of the biggest proponents of paying high taxes. I'm all about defunding as much as we can because I believe in less government spending. But the reality is, if you're very rich and you have good accountants and good lawyers, you're probably going to end up paying much less in taxes than people who are in the lower end of the spectrum. It sucks that, the people who are working out there in the hot sun all day are the ones who are going to get screwed royally by this whole situation. And you have the Fed in there just trying to do whatever they can to maintain the status quo, it seems. We're a stone's throw away from people losing confidence in the US dollar. And I would say that if this were to happen 5 years from now, when maybe cryptocurrency was a bit more common, and it's starting to become more common because there's even talk about PayPal starting to integrate with Bitcoin. You have Square integrating with Bitcoin. So there is definitely a move towards that. Obviously, Facebook Libra, which was a pseudo cryptocurrency, failed. Maybe they're going back to the drawing board. I'm not sure what stage of the game that is in, but something like that is coming. And when that comes, all of these countries right now who are still on the dollar for lack of better option, because there really is no better currency out there as a store of value, because all of the currencies are being degraded in tandem, relatively speaking, because most countries are doing the exact same thing that the US is doing, albeit not to as great of an extent because they don't have the ability to do it. So the US is really maxing out their credit card right now. And Canada, we're doing the exact same thing. just to a lesser extent, proportionally speaking, of course. But it's all going to catch up to us in the long run. We've had several major crises now, okay? We've had the pandemic, which in the grand scheme of things, you could argue, in terms of a death toll, relative to other things, you could say, okay, it hasn't been that bad yet. But I'm going to get to that because, obviously there's another upswing, there's a resurgence of the first wave, and we really don't know what to expect with the second wave. So then we had the economic crisis. Then we had the civil unrest. Okay, then now we have tensions between India and China. China is trying to project its influence throughout the entire region. Taiwan, obviously, there's stuff going on with North Korea and South Korea now. The India-Chinese border issue, as of course, India's cases are through the roof with the superbug. I call it that for reasons that I really shouldn't have to explain at this point. Everybody knows that nobody uses the real name of it in videos anymore, so I just call it that to give it a name. I don't necessarily think it's a superbug in terms of the antibiotic resistant sense of the word, but you know what I mean. So you have these geopolitical dimensions starting to come into play now. And of course, even though, yesterday, I can't remember what his name is, Peter Navarro, came out and said, oh, don't worry, the trade deal, it's fine, everything's fine with that. I'm not so sure, but, if they can keep the markets propped up, that's what it's all about, right? It's all about keeping the markets propped up, keeping everybody happy, because they're trying to play it flatline. I said in a video about a week ago that I suspect that the market is going to largely trade sideways for probably until some other big event happens, which will likely be in the fall, when we get a significant resurgence of cases or there's talk of another lockdown or something like that, which I don't even think they'll attempt at this point, because if they were to do that, the economy would be obliterated. I think that we will see corrections, big corrections. Like right now, confidence is getting very high. It's reaching that point once again. You got the NASDAQ over $10,000. You got people really putting a lot of money in the stock market. I think it's time for a pretty significant pullback right now in the markets, and I think we'll see that in the coming week. Once again, I don't know if it's going to be as dramatic as it was a week ago when the Dow dropped nearly 2,000 points in one day. I think there's going to be a relatively high sell-off coming for people wanting to get out before, we start to bring out the second quarter earnings. So, stay tuned for that. Be ready for that, which doesn't matter at all to somebody who's on food stamps and just trying to get by, because we know homelessness is going up. We know that there's unemployment lines that are in some cases miles long. There's a video clip on here of an unemployment line which just goes for miles, it seems. And these unemployment numbers, we don't know, how realistic they actually are. We can be certain that a lot of the speculation and the optimism that's factored into the markets right now is not going to be realized when those earnings come out, and that's probably going to cause a significant dip in the markets. But I also want to talk about this idea of civil war and why I think it's just silly. You got guys like Tim Pool who are always in a very roundabout sort of way, in a very circumspect kind of way. They're always promoting this, not promoting the idea, but they're always talking about how civil war is very probable. And I think that that's entirely inaccurate. I don't think that's what's going to happen at all. You see, in the actual Civil War, you had North versus South. It was very easy to have a war when you have clear-cut lines, between the North and South. Now there's just way too much overlap in terms of demographics, age, political affiliation, religion, among a variety of other factors. So there's just way too much overlap to ever have such distinct groups going at it with one another. Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be pockets of civil unrest, but it's going to be very decentralized. It's not going to amount to a centralized us versus them thing, because let's face it, there's a lot of people who have family members who are, have different allegiances to different political parties. I don't know if allegiance is the right word, but, they lean in different ways, politically speaking. we're living in a day and age where, you know, your parents might vote one way and you might vote another way, or your neighbor might vote one way and you might vote another way. The likelihood of that materializing into that, it's a lot of sensationalism. This whole Chaz thing in Seattle, I've watched some videos of that, and you got to be really careful about what you hear. Believe none of what you hear and half of what you see, okay? Because usually what you see is only half the story. So with this Chaz situation, the videos that I've seen and the research I've done, it looks like some kind of fringe festival. If you don't know what that is, it's basically just a bunch of hippies who get into one place and they, you know, kind of do what they want. So it's being talked up as this socialist revolution thing and this uprising and insurrection. And, you know, it's just a bunch of young people, to be honest, who are doing what young people do. And one thing to keep in mind with all these protests and all the riots and stuff like that, got to remember that everybody's been out of school for many, many months. So you have all of the young university students who are already, you know, the most rebellious there is in society. And you have all the teenagers who are doing a lot of the looting. See, nobody really talked about that, how all of these kids were out of school. They had nothing to do with their time but go out there and loot and cause a ruckus. So that was a big factor in which led, I think, to this sort of unrest. In addition to that, none of them had jobs because every place was closed. So you can see why the youthful, rebellious spirit is going to come out in those situations. And for a lot of people, if you ever had a civil war, you would just be fighting your kids. Because for a lot of these kids, I'm sure their parents don't agree with what they're doing. And that's what it is, largely, is a lot of kids, okay? I heard a quote once: if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative at 40, you have no brain. I guess I don't have a heart or a brain, or maybe I just have both. I don't know, because I can kind of see both sides of the spectrum. Anyways, I don't think there's going to be a civil war. Some of you may differ. You got your finger on the trigger and you're ready to go. And all I can say is just chill, man, because, you know, there's going to be bigger fish to fry. Now, there may be a civil conflict if shit hits the fan, if we go into Mad Max and we get another, you know, outbreak of a serious magnitude like I'm going to talk about here, and society, you know, the market just tanks, the Fed can't help us out anymore, they've maxed out their credit cards, the market tanks, there's massive unemployment, you know, proxy wars break out, hot wars break out, cold wars, fourth generation, interdimensional warfare breaks out, whatever you want to call it. If all goes to hell, then yes, in those conditions, then you might see that sort of dividing lines start to become more pronounced, and people would actually be able to engage in that sort of conflict. But right now, as it stands, I don't think it's realistic to presume that that's ever going to happen. I don't think anybody should want that to happen, because that would be absolutely horrible. I'm going to post an article below by Kaiser Health News. They break down what a first wave is, what a second wave is, and it seems to be a very comprehensive article explaining kind of where we're at and what we can likely expect based on the best evidence to date. But I want to read you something here. But this provides a good example of why, you know, we need to remain vigilant with respect to the anticipation of a potential second wave of this in the future. So it says that from September through November of 1918, the death rate for the Spanish flu skyrocketed. In the United States alone, roughly 200,000 Americans died from that flu in just 1 month of October. And unlike a normal seasonal flu, which often claims victims among the very young and very old, the second wave of the flu exhibited what's called a W curve. That is, high numbers of deaths among the young and old, but also a huge spike in the middle, composed otherwise of healthy 25 to 35-year-olds in the prime of their life. Damn, I guess I'm past the prime of my life. That sucks. That really freaked out the medical establishment, that there was this atypical spike. Not only was it shocking that healthy young men and women were dying by the millions worldwide, but it was also how they were dying. Struck with blistering fevers, nasal hemorrhaging, and pneumonia, the patients would drown in their own fluid-filled lungs. Only decades later were scientists able to explain the phenomena known as cytokine explosion. When the human body is attacked by a virus, The immune system sends messenger proteins called cytokines to promote helpful inflammation. But some strains of the flu, particularly the H1N1 strain responsible for the Spanish flu outbreak, can trigger a dangerous immune overreaction in healthy individuals. In those cases, the body is overloaded with cytokines, leading to severe inflammation and the fatal buildup of fluid in the lungs. So the actual severity of the flu doesn't actually change in that theory. So there's a theory that it mutated to become more infectious. In this theory, it's that the body's response, for whatever reason, which may have been triggered by some sort of herd immunity. I don't even want to speculate on what, but I'll post a link in the comment section and you can check it out for yourself. So obviously there's been a huge uptick in cases. Once again, the United States is starting to report record amounts of cases once again, and it didn't take long to happen, but it kind of did, because I think people were expecting, okay, we're going to open back up and a couple weeks later, you know, that's when we're going to start to see the exponential growth. But that's not really how it works, you know, especially with an R0 of 1 or 2. I mean, it takes a while for this to start to happen. So it's looking like it's going to start to spread again. The scary thing about this disease is the potential long-term effects. And it's kind of like a Lyme disease. You know, you just don't know, you know, what's going to come down the road as a result of it. So, you know, I would still be very wary. That said, you know, life has to go on. We need to keep the economy going. But I really think that, you know, one more wrench thrown in this machine and the shit will definitely hit the fan. Is it going to be full-blown Mad Max right away? No, not right away. But, you know, I think the Arctic just recorded its hottest temperature ever recorded. It was something like plus 30 degrees in the Arctic Circle. I'm not sure where in the Arctic Circle, somewhere in Siberia, who's just getting scorched right now. So fortunately, all of the heat is trapped in a place where there's very low population density. But, I mean, you still have that as a problem out there in left field. You know, it's going to be a very interesting year. We're not even halfway through the year yet. This is crazy. So let's try to stay optimistic, but at the same time, be realistic, because this little thing basically derailed the whole system. So imagine a big thing. That's the simplest way I can put it. A big thing would probably destroy the system, or at least set us back many, many years. This is already a lost year in terms of technological advancement and all those things, by and large. But it's also, in some people's mind, a year where the future just became the future faster, because we were all forced indoors, into our cubicles, onto our machines, into our virtual spaces. And that really, I think, was the long game plan. Anyways, stay tuned for the video coming out this weekend. It's going to be part 2 of the complete guide to survival gear. It's probably going to be 3 parts now, because it is a very big project, but I believe it's important. And I got to get out there and do some camping. I really have to get out there and get into the bush, because I am getting really, really stir crazy just seeing pavement all the time. So I hope you guys can do the same. Anyway, stay tuned for that video, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you do need gas masks, respirators, I just got a supply in from Mira Safety for the CM6M face masks. We have SGE, BB, butyl rubber, CBRN face masks. We have the tactical versions of the CM-6M mask. So we have a bit more inventory right now. I'm guessing that come winter time, or not winter, fall, September to November, that stock is going to dry up a lot. So like I say, right now, this is the eye of the storm. Time to get stocked up again for the fall. So check out the links in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay ready. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. Your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER. All one word in all caps.